First time I met him was, I have a good friend who will be here tonight. His name is Brad. He is a Blackberry Smoke fan and was a friend of Merle's. And we were talking much like you and I are now. And he asked if I ever met him. And I said no. And he said, well, he's going to be playing in Atlanta at the Buckhead Theater, which was it was half a mile from my house at the time. And I was like, I kind of was waiting for it. And here it came. He was like, you want to come meet him? I was like, yes, I do. And so he allowed me to come. And Frank was Merle's tour manager at the time. Very lovely gentleman. I think he'd been in that position for decades, but he was very, very sweet and brought us back. And my son was, I think, 2 at the time. Took him in there and got to watch sound check. And Merle, he had heard our version of Yesterday's Wine with George. And so he said, I like that. Good job. I said, thanks, man. He was very, very soft-spoken and not as talkative as I had hoped he would be, but very, very nice. Not as talkative as George. It wasn't really silence. We just hung out for a minute, and I introduced him to my wife and son, and then they sound checked, and then he was like, I hope you enjoy the show. I said, okay. And then I saw him one more time the next year in Carrollton, Georgia, in the outdoor show there. Just a similar, good to see you.
Did you see the sound check?
Yes.
Was it I've heard that he would play for a long time and just want to jam in sound checks.
He did at the Buckhead Theater, which is a great venue. It's the old Roxy in Atlanta. And he played through 2, I think they were Bandmaster type tweed amps, kind of canked in toward him, and they were loud as hell. And I remember thinking, yes, I love that. Because, we see people go the way of quiet, and quiet music is boring. It sucks. So I was glad he's old school, and he was a great guitar player. I think maybe a lot of people don't realize that because he always had, Roy Nichols playing in his band. And Ben is a fantastic guitar player too, but Merle would take solos, that Tough Dog Telly, and very jazzy, but really an unsung guitar hero.
Did he still have his voice?
He did. Yeah, he sang really, really well. And I forget what he said that night, and I have used it in my ministry. He made a joke about not being able to dance. God, what was it? It was really clever and brilliant, and I'm sure he had used it many times, but it was a really good, you're not allowed to dance here, apparently, kind of joke. My old buddy from Carrollton, Georgia, Zach Steed, his dad told me once, because I'll do acoustic shows every year, Benji and I, and, it gets chatty, and it sucks. And there's nothing you can do. You can't stop it. And if you do, you're a dick, if you call somebody out. And so they were a bluegrass band called Bullsboro. And if they played a quiet one, it would get chatty. And Zach's dad, Mike, who is deceased, and he was a great man, he said, I always say, you know what? We can play quieter so y'all don't have to talk as loud. And I said, that's brilliant. And he said, you're welcome to use that in your ministry, son. Man, it's a little more all over the place with Merle. The Roots Volume 1 record, I love that one. That Bluegrass Sessions that he did with Marty Stewart, and is Mike Bubb on that maybe? Can't remember. Maybe. It's really good. That very first stuff, Sing a Sad Song and all that, that's great too. But it was like these bursts of genius that he had all throughout these decades. And I can't keep track the different labels that he worked with, but like the Capitol stuff is great. But then later the stuff that's like Always on a Mountain When I Fall and Red Bandana and all that. I don't know if that was RCA or whatever, but it's like a different artist almost. Like he's changing with the times, but remaining Merle Haggard. We used to drive around in the van and listen to, before iPods, I had a bag of CDs, like a grocery bag that was just like ripping at the seams full of CDs. And I remember listening to, it was like one of those best of Merle Haggard, and it had, I think I'll Just Stay Here and Drink, I think was the first song on it. And I remember Britt, we laughed about how you get through that song and there's a great guitar solo, and then maybe there's piano, and then there's a sax solo. And we laughed about, I'm like, how many rednecks around this country were like, get their beer like, you know, like, what the hell is that? You know? And then there's it's got that groove that's like that halftime groove, and the drummer just goes around the kit. And I didn't know, I'm not a drummer, but I was just like, that's ridiculous. And he goes, what's ridiculous is those electronic drums that the toms, it's like he's playing Panama. What are you doing? Yeah, he had a great saxophonist that night at the show, Buckhead Theater. But I knew that, so it wasn't the spit your beer out moment.
And Merle loved Dixieland.
Yeah.
I wanted some of that, and I get it.
Yeah. I wonder if he and Willie were like, if that was common ground with them. Because obviously Waylon, that wasn't his bag. But it was theirs. And they both had that kind of guitar playing that sort of lent itself to that.
He posted on Instagram a picture of a Jerry Lee Lewis country album that just happened to be, it's probably the album I've listened to more than anything else in my life.
Yeah.
Because it was Jerry Lee was my dad's favorite, and he loved the country stuff.
Yes. I really felt kinship with you and Kenny Vaughn talking about Jerry Lee being the greatest, like second only to George Jones. His vocals on those country records, they're just unstoppable. It's so natural. I can't even describe it. It's like, why does it sound so much fucking easier for him than it does everybody else? It's like it's effortless.
He's a pure instrument in every way.
Yeah.
I agreed, if my memory serves me right, Kenny said something to the effect of George Jones is the greatest country singer of all time. Jerry Lee's his favorite.
Yeah, that's it.
And I kind of, I agree with that.
Yeah. Not cheesy at all. It's like anything he said, obviously because he's like saying shit about himself between verses, like over somebody's solo.
Oh, that's the killer, baby.
That's right. One of my favorites is, play your little instrumental lick there, son. Like, what? Okay. And even it doesn't, I'm like, somehow that's not ridiculous. It sounds right at home. It sounds appropriate. I mean, I was trying to explain to my youngest son, we're talking about, he loves Little Richard and Elvis, and he's a very musical little guy. And so I was just playing him my favorite singers, just because he's getting into singing so much. And I'm like, he's not ready to hear Europe 72, The Dead yet, you know, he's not ready. But he's ready for Jailhouse Rock and Lucille and all this stuff, you know, Great Balls of Fire. I'm like, the Little Richard, like Lucille, he's like, whoa. And I remember having the exact same reaction as a kid, like, that's extreme. Like, the way that man is singing is extreme. It's not like I have heard in church or how my dad sings around the house. It's exciting and a little scary. And I was telling, I don't know, I didn't explain it like this to my 10-year-old son, but I'm like, those dudes were all like wild people, you know. That's why they started this thing, you know. Elvis was a wild dude, you know, and of course Little Richard and Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee were, because it's even a little more obvious with them, like the trouble they got in. But they were fearless. They'd have to be. And they couldn't be normal and easy, you know, or boring, or we wouldn't have a reason to be talking right now. My earliest memories of Dick, I met him, first time I met him was in Columbus, Ohio, on a triple bill with us, Kenny Wayne Shepherd, and Great Southern. And I had already spent some time with his son Dwayne in California when none of us were sober. And I've been sober 17 years, so it feels like an eternity ago, but far from it back then. And we were wild and crazy and never slept and doing the thing. And it was crazy to meet Dickey because he was wilder than all of us, but just, he was a giant, you know? And I remember watching him go up, and it was not lost on me that every note that came out of his hands, I'm like, much like George Jones, I'm like, this dude has created this landscape of, he and Dwayne Allman, the guitar landscape that I exist in came from them. Really, I mean, first and foremost, as much as, I love Rossington and Collins and Ed King and Steve Gaines and Lowell George and Billy Gibbons. But I think Dwayne and Dickey were that's the first altar we knelt at. And just watching him operate every night. And he was a fierce band leader, taskmaster. I remember thinking, I'm glad I'm not in that band because he is pissed right now. But he's always sweet to me, just a generous dude with information and talking about the kind of amps they used to play. Or I didn't know him very well, just was only around him a few times.
Were you asking these questions about amps, or was he just offering?
I asked. And I wasn't, even with Billy, I don't like to ask too many questions, It's like, don't be a pest.
Say you're welcome.
Yeah. But the last time I saw Dickey was in Florida. We played with Dwayne and Devin Allman, their band, and Dickey. He was in full grandpa mode. He came out, and I think he was done playing, and he looked happier than I've ever seen him. That was maybe 5 years ago. He just sat on the side of the stage and just was happy to be there, smiling, grinning from ear to ear. I had a mixed bag to choose from because my dad is a bluegrass lover, a guitar player, and there are country musicians that get kind of pulled into that world. Hank Williams, and not really George Jones though. That's a little too honky tonk. But Ernest Tubb and Hank Williams, they're kind of allowed, And then my mom liked the Stones and the Beatles and the Beach Boys and Bob Dylan. And my sister's 4 years older, so she liked what was popular. She liked the rock and roll that was on the radio, Def Leppard and Rat and Van Halen. And so I got into all that, and Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath. And then a friend of mine, I think I was in the 6th grade, he had Live at the Fillmore East. And it was like, this is different. Like just those first slide licks. It became, okay. And I was just thinking about it the other day, like so much of the stuff that Dickey wrote, Elizabeth Reed and Blue Sky and Ramblin' Man and even Hot Lana and La Brea in A minor, Jessica. That's what you learn. When you're a kid from Georgia with a guitar, that's what you learn. Those are standards. And Dwayne, his son, do you know Dwayne? Well, he looks like Dickey just spit him out. I mean, it's amazing how much he looks like. But he has that feel in his hands. And it's not a mimicry thing. He got it. It's genetic. When you hear him play, you're like, wow. Okay. It's in his skin.
A lot of that stuff Dickey is playing, this might be common knowledge out there to everyone, but to me, a lot of that stuff that Dickey was playing sounds like it could be fiddle lines in Bob Wills songs.
Yeah.
I don't know whether he had a big love of Western swing.
Totally. And we never talked about that. In fact, I just was talking to Dwayne. We just played a show with him down in Florida. And he said, my dad would have loved to sit and talk about that and about fingerpicking because that was his stuff. That's where he came from. We never got to do that, but yeah, he loved that first solo record he made, the Richard Forrest Betts Highway Call, is full of that.
I saw a picture of you, Warren Haynes, maybe Steve Lukather, and and Billy Gibbons. What's the story behind that? Where were you? There was another person there who I didn't know who it was. But
That was a guitar event in San Diego, California. It was we were the headline act on a festival there, and it was put together. I think it was called Guitar Greats Salute America, which I'm not folding myself into that idea of being great, but I was honored to be there. It was my first time meeting Steve Lukather, who is amazing, hilarious human, and obviously a great player. We were each going to get up and do a couple songs. George Thorogood was there. Nancy Wilson was there. Warren, Steve Lukather, of course, Billy. I forget who else. Great band. Anyway, they were like, what song would you like to do? And we had taken a couple of months off, and I had just written this new song called Hey Delilah, and I was really excited about it. And I told Billy and the band leader, I was like, I want to do this song. And all I had was a garage band demo of it. And I don't know what I was thinking, but I sent it to the band and to Billy and to Lukather, and they all loved it, and that's what we did. And the dudes in my band are like, what song is this? You know? And I was like, well, I just wrote it yesterday. So the first time I ever played it in front of people was with them. And then we all got up and did, I think we did I Thank You with Billy. But, man, that was a fantastic day. Just listening to Warren and Billy and Lukather tell stories. That was a great fly on the wall day.
one of the early memories of mine is back before YouTube and all of that. My buddies and somebody would get a VHS tape.
Yeah.
Of somebody playing something, and somebody had this instructional tape of Steve Lukather,
Yeah.
and he's playing the lead to Hold the Line, Rosanna, and we're just like, what in the heck? And you're watching people doing this thing,
Yeah.
and it sounds like I'd never really heard anything like that.
Yeah.
It made quite the impression on a bunch of knuckleheads in rural Indiana.
Totally. I love it now that I've seen him in interviews just in the past year where he's like shedding a lot of light on the sessions, the Thriller sessions when Eddie Van Halen came in and played on it, who he knew they were buddies, and that was a favor. I think he's the one that called and was like, will you come play on this record? And Eddie's like, who is it? And he did it for nothing or like a 6-pack or something. But then he also told such an interesting story, and I probably don't have the details correctly here, but the first time that McCartney came to record with Michael Jackson was not very far removed from when John Lennon was murdered. And he said security was really, really, really tight. And I thought, whoa, that's heavy to think about. Because McCartney was just like, I got to take care of it. I got to take good care. I mean, I never would have thought about that. It's like, anyway, his, and it was no knock on McCartney. It was just like, that was a heavy time. I met George through our manager, Trey Wilson. He had been working with him. There was an ill-fated entertainment complex down in South Alabama, down in Dothan. And it was the guy that was building it and putting it together on the independent label that we were signed to. He had all these great plans. It was going to be like this little country music town. He had a George Jones bed and breakfast and a Lori Morgan's country cafe and John Anderson's blacksmith shop, and all this. It was great. It was a great idea, and it didn't work out. And there was some legal trouble that some people wound up in. I think it was all about gambling, but I don't know. It was fun while it lasted. But that's where we met George. And we had started to play shows with Jamie Johnson, who was a friend. And I was talking to Jamie one day and said, we should go record Yesterday's Wine. We could do it like George and Merle did it. And he said, oh, that's a great idea. And so I told Trey Wilson, and we booked the day. We went to, I think it used to be Curb Studios there, and James Stroud was like, I'll produce it. And we're like, oh, okay. Look how easy this is. And Trey said, would you want George to come? And I thought, I mean, of course we would, but that's crazy to think about, you know. He said,
sing in front of George Jones.
He said he'll do it. And I thought, sure he will. And I really didn't believe he would do it until he walked through the door. And I was like, holy shit, okay. And we had already actually tracked the song. It was just one day, you know, in there. The band, we tracked it, and Jamie and I sang it. And George came in at like 4 o'clock, he and his wife, Nancy. And then I was blown away. I mean, I got goosebumps thinking about it. It was just like, in walks the greatest country singer that's ever lived. And James Stroud he pressed play, you know, on the playback. And Cowboy Eddie Long was there, played steel on it. And George was like, it was really loud. And like you're listening to playback in a control room. And George goes, that's country music right there. And I thought, how fucking great is that? Because we're a rock band. But we like rootsy music. And I grew up playing country and bluegrass, so I understand. We're not just this rock band that's like, we're going to make a country record. You know what I mean? Like if Creed decided to make a country. Sorry, Creed. But it's not foreign to us, you know. But that was such a badge there for a second. So it finishes, and he's like, that'll work. And he goes, I got to be honest, I thought y'all were a black gospel group. And I think it's our name, Blackberry Smoke. I don't know, maybe he was probably like, who am I going to? Because he had no idea who we were. And I thought, God, I wish. I mean, but then we went in, he said, we had already done it. And James Stroud was like, I don't know, because James had just turned 80, or George had just turned 80. And so Stroud was like, I don't know how much he'll want to do. He may want to sing a line. Who knows, you know. And he said, I want to sing the whole thing with y'all. So Jamie and George and I went in and sang the whole thing again. And it was, I mean, I can't even describe it. It was just like, he didn't have to be coached. He knew what to do.
Were you guys singing in the same mic?
Same mic.
With George Jones?
With George Jones. Yeah. And it was just like that Leon Russell clip from A Poem as a Naked Person or whatever. He goes, it's kind of hard to sing when George Jones is in the booth. That's exactly right. He sang lower than Jamie and I and higher than us. It's crazy.
So we have these weird moments in life, but you are a kid listening to George Jones records. You never think that one day you might meet them, let alone sing on the same damn microphone.
That's right. Now, my grandmother's brothers were a gospel quartet called the Swanee River Boys. They started in the 40s, and they were active up until the early to mid 70s. And I grew up around them at family get-togethers and things in Wedowee, Alabama. That's where they were from. And the leader of the band was Buford Abner was his name. He lived to be 94. And Sturgill recorded a song he wrote called Long White Line on the Metamodern record. It's all just kind of crazy. But I told him after we had done that with George, I said, did you know George Jones? He said, yeah, I did. They spent time in Nashville a lot and recorded with a lot of the same producers and studios. And apparently he got in a lot of trouble with that young man. I thought, okay.
Did he give you any particular stories?
He didn't, but I can remember some talk around even though they were a gospel quartet, you know, it was still touring, you know, and a lot of young man kind of stuff. But I think that was it was the industry. It was the touring musicians industry. So I even talked to Charlie Leuven at one point and asked if he remembered the Swanees. And he said, oh, yeah, we spent time with them too. So they were all running the same little highways before the super highways, running the back roads.
Can you imagine what touring would have been like?
With the bass fiddle on top of the car, laying on each other. We have it made.
No air conditioning.
Yeah. I love the Starr Day stuff. That's my favorite. I kind of subscribe to Kenny Vaughn's opinions. We talked about that, and about Billy Sherrill saying that he only ever got 80% of what George could do, but luckily for all of us, 80% of George is better than 120 of everybody else. But that stuff, I love the 70s stuff too. It's great for a different reason. But I was talking to Warren Haynes about George and Ray Charles, the way their voices deepened as they got older from cigarettes and other things too, probably, but mainly, nicotine and age, and how their voices got richer and bigger. It's like their voices sound wider, But still, man, those early recordings that's the shit. That's the kind of thing I listen to and think nobody can sing better than this. Nobody. Like any genre of music, nobody sings better than this. George.
Everything you're hearing on those recordings took place live on the floor.
Yeah.
Probably into one microphone sometimes.
Yeah, or like we talked about the Salutes George Jones record that they recorded in 2 hours. What was the label? If it was it Musicor that had Your Angel Steps Out of Heaven, and there was a song that I asked him actually if he still would sing, and he said no, it's too high, which is bullshit because he could sing that high, and it was Things Have Gone to Pieces. And anyway, that's the greatest stuff ever. It's another example of a guy that was coming to see us play a lot, and he was friends with Bob Weir, and he said, would you like to meet Bob? And I was like, yeah, because I came to the Grateful Dead late. My wife, when I first met her, she had followed the Dead a bit when she was in college, and I was aware. I had heard the radio songs. I had never owned a Dead record. And she was playing one of the Dick's Picks. It's from the Fox Theater in Atlanta in 1977. We were like cooking hamburgers on the deck or something, and I fell in love. I was like, well, with her and with this album. But I'm like, what is this again? And I get the CD, I'm looking at it, and I fell just hopelessly in love with their music. And then American Beauty, and then Working Man's Dead, and then more live stuff. But then Europe 72 was like, oh, I like this the best. Because it's kind of funky, and it lived in the same place that the band kind of did, Had that kind of, that halftime up on Cripple Creek kind of feel. Tennessee Jed's got that. And that I was like, this shit speaks to me, More than like the experimental acid trip kind of, let's see how much noise we can make. That's not really never been really my thing. Songs, I like songs. Anyway, so this guy was like, would you like to meet Bob? We say, yeah. So we were going out to play around San Francisco, and they worked it out to where at that point, this was before Dead and Company or any of that. Bob I think he was only doing the occasional Rat Dog show, if at all. But he was jamming with his buddies a lot at TRI Studios, which he opened out there with Bill Kreutzmann's son, Justin. And they would have people come over and jam, and they would film it and stream it. And so they worked it all out, and he's like, Bob would like to do it with you guys. And we were like, yeah, this would be great. So I wasn't even sure if he would want to do Dead songs then, because I don't think much of that was going on for him at the time. Maybe, I'm not sure. I wasn't really aware of what he was doing at that moment, but he's like, of course. So I picked out, he let me pick them. And then we got there, he's like, the plan was we would do an hour with Bob and then an hour just our band. And we had a new album coming out, so we were going to do a bunch of those. But it couldn't be loud. It was in a quiet little, controlled studio environment, mostly acoustic in the beginning. And then he's like, let's play electric, But the songs I picked, he added a few. He's like, could we do Big River? I said, yeah. Then he said, could we do Willin' by Little Feat? I said, absolutely. And Up on Cripple Creek by the band. he picked those. And it was a great day. He came, it was 2 days really. He came in the second day, and then he had to take his daughter to see Taylor Swift. And he's like, I don't really have any idea who this is, but my daughter loves her. And that was in 2000, probably 13, yeah, I think right around there. So it didn't see the light of day for years. And we had a blast. He told stories. We were talking about music they loved. And he told me, he's like, he wanted to do Yesterday's Wine, which we wound up not doing. But he said, George Jones is my favorite musician. And I was like, really? He goes, aside from Jerry Garcia, George Jones is my favorite musician. And he said, the way that you feel about Jerry, that's how I feel about George. And it makes sense because he would do the races on, And
I wonder if George ever played with the Dead.
I doubt it.
Wouldn't that have been something?
I bet he would have been extremely confused. But Bob told me also, he said, I told him I had played with a steel player who had seen Buck Owens and the Buckaroos live in the 60s with Buck and Don Rich, and how loud they were because they played Fender Twin amps, just dimed, tellies. And he said, I saw it too. He said, Jerry and I went to see him, and he named the theater. I don't know if it was the Warfield. I don't know if that existed in the 60s maybe, but it was in the Bay Area. He said, we went and saw him, and he said, they took us to school. And he said, we because they were in like a jug band at the time, maybe 2 different jug bands. The Dead didn't exist yet, but they knew each other. I think Jerry was giving Bob guitar lessons maybe at the time. But he said they were like the country Beatles, which they were aware of, obviously. And they weren't supposed to like, but he said we loved them because of their vocal harmonies. But he said, the power of the Buckaroos was not lost on them. They were like, oh shit, we got to be that good,
When you're playing with Bob Weir, like part of his thing is him comping chords and making interesting spaces for Garcia to improvise over. Was it hard to keep space there for him?
No.
What goes into that in your head when you're playing there?
His guitar playing is such a huge part of the Dead. And if I didn't know that before we played with him, that was the moment where I was like, oh my God, what you just said, all those different chord shapes, and
he's got a thing.
He's got a thing, that very rhythmic chugging thing that he does. It was extremely powerful in our jam. I'm like, I don't need to do anything. I mean, it's Bob Weir's, he is moving this train. Even Britt, our drummer, was like, I'm following what he's doing. He's like, it was so cool to hear that in my right ear, like, okay, that's our percussionist for a while, Preston Holcomb, he really loved the Jerry Garcia band. I do too, but I'm like, I like the Dead more because of Bob. When Bob's not there, it bumps me out, but he was great. He had gotten into that. He likes to play slow, He's like, I remember thinking, we did Promised Land. He would always sing that, with the Dead. And I was like, you want to start it? And he's like, you start it. So I was like, okay. Excuse me. So I'm like, no. He goes, whoa. Slow down. So I was like, no, slow down. It was like that Andy Griffith episode. Quiet. And I literally was like, like I can't physically play this any slower. And he's like, yes, perfect. But it was great. So years later, I was emailing with Justin Kreutzmann, who's a filmmaker and super talented dude, and grew up in the Dead. His dad's Bill Kreutzmann. He was going through some of that footage, and he's like, "This stuff is really good, man. I think there are people that would really like it because it only happened that one night, the stream, and it wasn't available again." And so we were like, I think our fans will dig it, And so we got together and mixed the audio, and he edited the video and put it together, and we started selling it. And it was just and right after that is when they did like the Fare Thee Well with Trey from Fish. So it was like the putting it away forever. And then they immediately made the announcement, but now we're going to do it with O'Teal and John Mayer, and it's called Dead and Company. So, I mean, we had nothing to do with that, but we caught him in a window where he wasn't busy, is my point.
I went down a rabbit hole a couple of years ago, and I mean this with all respect and love to the dead, of the incident that happened in Indianapolis back in the 90s where at Deer Creek Amphitheater where some fans rushed the fence. And I learned so much about the cultural phenomenon that was the dead right then that I feel like most of the world completely ignored. Mm-hmm. But there were 200,000 people showed up to a random dead gig that were there on site, where probably 20,000 could get in with tickets or whatever. And there were people following them around like this, and the media and the country at large were completely ignoring it.
Unaware, yeah.
It's like Springsteen, Born in the USA, or Michael Jackson, Thriller, level big,
yeah.
And it was completely ignored. That's an amazing cultural phenomenon that they were.
My wife, I was clueless also, I mean, I knew that Jerry Garcia was this deified musician, It just was, I hadn't gone there yet until I met her. And then I really dug in and was like, this man was, and not just, the whole band, but specifically him. I'm like, he is an American music original. Like, he literally is an original voice, an original creator of this hodgepodge of American music, and then he died, and it just was like an amazing loss. But she told me about like all the different factions, like the Spinners and the Sober People, who are the Wharf Rats, this whole, like, all these little microcosms of Dead fans that, like, 200,000 people full of all these little cliques. And I'm like, that's amazing. Like, and then just the merchandise and the taping and just a phenomenon. But then you think about it, because, I remember first learning about the Wall of Sound and how they had Dan Healy and Owsley Stanley, Bear. And so all these people that were involved, I guess, in putting that all together. And the idea was a line array. If you really stand back far enough to see the idea now, it's like they wanted, you got the line arrays now that are like this, and they're small boxes, and coverage is what they were looking for. They wanted there to not be a bad sounding seat in the venue or the experience or the field or whatever. And so they wound up taking that monstrosity of tens of thousands of pounds of speakers and equipment just to make people have a good listening experience at their show, a better listening experience. Like, that's nuts. I keep seeing over the years parts of that system that are for sale. Some speaker cabinet. I'd love to have a piece of it. They were called Hard Trucker cabinets, I think, maybe. Maybe that was the company. I have a good photographer friend, John Gelman. He's in Asheville, North Carolina. He took pictures of a bunch of those shows. He has pictures of Dickey Betts sitting in with the brothers in '73. And I said, what was the Wall of Sound like? And he said, omnipresent. I said, loud? And he goes, it wasn't about being loud. It was, you could not escape it. But he said it sounded excellent. They accomplished what they were trying to achieve. It was perfect.
It had to have been a pain in the ass to haul around.
It looked like a skyscraper. And they took it to Europe. They put it on boats, I guess. Insane. They were not in it to make money. Just wanted to sound good.
I've thought that I was not in it.
I'm not either, yeah.
There's no proof that I'm in it to make money.
We were hired to open for them for 2 months. And I think it was in 2006. The first show was in Pikeville, Kentucky. And we were in a van. We had one crew guy. It was just 4 of us then. It was before we got Brandon on keys. But we only had room enough for 5 people in the van, really, with suitcases. And I don't think we had a trailer yet. I think we put our gear we took out 2 seats and piled it all in the back. In fact, we called it the little cubby because there was on top of there was a drum box. It was the biggest case. There was a sleeping bag, and we took turns sleeping up there. Well, so we go to Pikeville, and we're just so excited, and we had like 30 minutes to play, and we moved our own gear, and we learned how to get out of the way, play your 30 minutes, and people liked us. Our music it was a pretty good fit. It wasn't too far removed from what ZZ Top was about to go do. Obviously, they're ZZ Top, but it wasn't like we were, Devo opening for ZZ Top. But Billy, I learned then, he's a venue dweller. So he comes to he doesn't hang out at the hotel, or he didn't then. He didn't hang out at the hotel all day like some people do. He comes to the venue, he eats catering, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and he hangs out. And he started hanging out with us, talking guitars. He came out and would watch every sound check we would do. He'd be standing there with a piece of pie or cake, getting crumbs in his beard, watching us. And if we played something he liked, he'd give us the fork of approval, And then one day he's like, "I'd like to play the drums." So somewhere we have a video of we're doing Willin' by Little Feat with Billy playing the drums. That night, though, back Pikeville, Kentucky, here we are. We're so excited, and we play our show, and their tour manager, Pablo, who we love dearly now, we just met him. He comes up and goes, "We have a problem." And we were like, Britt and I, our drummer, who's deceased now, we're like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, I need you to get all your guys together. And we were like, "Oh shit, we've blown it. What did we do?" We got out of the way. We didn't go over. Young bands, don't ever go over. That's a big deal. Don't go over 30 seconds. Stop on time. Stop early if you can. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was, I think the day before that gig, they played the big Houston rodeo, which is their hometown, obviously. And they were given like solid gold and silver belt buckles. And they had just done the VH1 Rock Honors, and they all got rings. And there were some pretty expensive watches in their dressing rooms, I'm sure. Other things, that were valuable. Somebody robbed them. So we were fucking number 1 suspects because we were the newest additions to the tour. And we were like, "Oh no, like this couldn't be worse." We were told, "We saw you." We were in a dressing room, so of course we were in the hallway. But that was, "We saw you in the hallway on the closed caption, footage." And we were like, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." So we called our manager, and he was like, "All I can say is empty your pockets. I mean, unload all your gear and prove to them that you strip down if you have to," and be like, we didn't steal anything." Because I think somebody stole a lot of that stuff. So it was really, Dusty Hill, I'll never forget, was standing over to the side and giving us this. He shook his head no. I was like, "Oh my God." And we're like, and they played. And after their show was over, the tour manager came back and said, "Rest easy. We found the guy." It was a local crew guy. They finally, they got him on the footage. I mean, I don't know maybe it wasn't digital footage. Maybe they were having to go through, with a fine-tooth comb, hitting rewind a lot, but they were like, "We got him." And one of the local crew guys was like, "I know who that is." He was local crew, but he was a dirty, rotten scoundrel. Yeah, so the next day we were all just like, "Oh my God." And the next day, Dusty came over. He was out having a smoke. I was having a smoke, and he was like, he eased over to me, and he's like, "I knew y'all didn't do that." And I thought, "No, you didn't." But that was the beginning of our relationship with them, and I got to be pretty close with Billy, and it was all about guitars and blues, and I'd ask him questions about Houston, about Lightning Hopkins and Jimmy Reed, and just the stuff that he loved, And I remember I had just gotten a Lightning. It was the Aladdin record story, and it was still acoustic stuff. And I was like, I like this. I showed him I got it. It was a double CD. Look at this, anthology. I was like, this is great. It doesn't have any of the electric stuff on it. He goes, that's the shit you want. You want the electric stuff. And I was like, I do? Oh. And you do. You want it all. But he talked about Lightning and Mance Lipscomb and just all these Texas people. Talk about the T-Birds, the early days of the Thunderbirds and Jimmy. And he hipped me to the Red Devils, a band from California. He was like, if you like the T-Birds, you'll love the Red Devils. The same kind of thing. Doing it real, And they had an album. He loved to burn CDs back then. He had his laptop out and he would burn. He made me his best of the XLO Records catalog, his favorite XLO sides. I still have it with, Lightning Slim and Slim Harpo and just tons of other great artists that I never would have. Well, I'd heard of them, but there were so many obscure things I never would have heard if he hadn't made me those CDs.
Did you ever play any of his guitars?
I did. Elwood, his tech, who is now the bass player, he was always very open with, come on over and check this out. I always wanted it to be Pearly Gates, but it wasn't because he doesn't tour with Pearly, not in a long time. But a crazy thing, we had a little break from the tour and we went and played the NAMM show. We played Orange Amplifier's 40th anniversary party with Mark Ford and Deacon Jones, B3 player that played with Freddie King. And I think John Lee Hooker too. Anyway, I was walking around the NAMM show there that year. I think that was 2007. And I saw the relaunched Dan Armstrong guitars hanging in a booth. And I talked to the guy in the booth and got some information. And I went back to the tour and I was having lunch with Billy. And I said, did you ever have a Dan Armstrong? And he went, I did. And I said, did you like it? He said, I loved it. And those were circa 1969, 1970 Ampeg guitars, And I always wanted one because Keith had one and Joe Perry had one and Rick Richards and Ron Wood and even Tom Kiefer. All these guys, played that guitar. I said, well, they're making them again. And he said, they are. I said, yeah, I saw some at the NAMM show. And he said, we got to get us one. And I thought, yeah, that'd be great, 2 days later, Pablo comes by. I'm walking through the dressing room hallway or something, and he says, hey, come in here. Billy wants to talk to you. And I went in, and there were 2 boxes. I saw them when I walked in. And I tried not to make it obvious that I just kind of side-eyed him, and he's like, come sit down. And I did, and we talked for like 30 minutes. But all I could think about were those boxes over by the door. And finally, he was like, all right, well, I'll see you later. And I thought, oh. And I got up to walk out, and he goes, hey, wait a minute. Grab one of those boxes there. And I did and pulled it out. And we sat down and swapped it back and forth. And then
was he just toying with you?
He gave it to me.
I mean, like when that whole...
Yes, he was. He had, because the way that they were, which maybe he wasn't, I don't know. But he's a very giving person, He would do, that was a really grand gesture and a very generous thing to do. I still have it. I love that guitar dearly. I quit touring with it a while back. Just, it's special, But even otherwise, every day he would give us something. Little robots or bow ties that spin or something. It was always some little trinket. One day was chocolate-covered grasshoppers. Have you had these? Now you have. Here you go. He is maybe the most unique person I've ever met in the most beautiful way.
He seems to understand the space that he occupies in our minds and in our emotions of history and all of that.
I think he does. I think you're exactly right. What a great way to put it. Yeah. He also would give advice, because he's always been a little different and you might say off kilter compared to his contemporaries. He had a different slant on things. Like even that first record on the back when it's called Abstract Blues. You know what I mean? Like, of course it is, because it's not commonplace. It's different. They had their own spin on what they were doing, and then they went from like ragged jeans and like plaid shirts to nudie suits on Fandango, and that confused me because when I was a kid, that's the first thing I saw, and I thought nudie suits equals country band. That was my way of thinking. And then you get it and put it on, and I'm like, no, it's not a country band. And but he told me one day, he was like, you know what you guys need to do? You need to change your image a little bit. And I was like, really? And he goes, yeah. I mean, you got a thing, but it's kind of been done, you know. And I was like, I mean, I guess everything has. As he's telling me this, I'm thinking, well, he created something that hadn't been really done, you know, with the beards and with the way that as they moved into the early 80s. And he said, are you familiar with Doug Somm? I said, I am. He goes, Sir Douglas Quintet? I said, yeah. He goes, that's what you need to do. He goes, you know, they confused people when they came out. People thought they were British because they wore black suits and little black ties and Cuban heels. That's what you need to do. I couldn't talk the rest of the band into it. I thought it was a great idea. But he's always thinking. His wheels are always turning. You know? I mean, I remember the first one that I picked up, Elwood was like, don't hurt yourself. Those are extremely small, you know, 7s or 8s, but really slinky. How amazing is it that it doesn't sound like that when he plays it? And somebody told me, we've never spoken of it, the two of us, but somebody told me that B.B. King told him, he picked up a guitar of his and said, why are you working so hard? And since then, you know Brian Henneman. Brian is...
I love Brian.
A great friend, and he is an encyclopedia of guitar knowledge, and not just, hey, this is a 1952 Telecaster. He knows the gauges of strings that people played. So he talks about James Burton's wacky gauge choices and Albert King, who are probably the weirdest of all, or Tony Iommi, which he's missing a couple of fingertips, so he can play what he wants to, but it all makes such a difference in the way those instruments sound, and therefore the way those dudes play. With Billy, I'm like, even now, it's like you sound like the same dude that was playing Waiting for the Bus. How is it that he went from 10s or 11s to 8s and you can't tell? I don't know. He did tell me once, he's like, you know what I love about this? And I said, what? And he said, I go out there every night and I'll try anything on the guitar. We're talking about guitar, playing the guitar. He goes, y'all need to quit rehearsing so much. And we didn't. We would just sound check every day, you know, and maybe I guess we were running through stuff or whatever. And he goes, just let it go, man. Just go for it. Sometimes you land it, sometimes you don't. And I thought, now that's easier for you to say because you sold all these tickets. But if we go out there in front of your fans and don't land it, that's all they're going to talk about. But I love him, man. What an original. I met him once. It was at the North Texas Rock Rally. But Billy Joe was so good. And rewind several years, I had done some sessions I love Billy Joe. And especially that live at Smith's Old Bar, Unshaven, with Eddie playing. I wasn't at that show, but I was at a show about 6 months later at a place called the Buckboard Country Showcase. And I saw it was Keith Christopher on bass, Craig Wright on drums, Eddie on guitar, and Billy Joe. That band. Craig Wright played with Eric Church the last I saw him. And Keith is in Skinnerd. Anyway, fantastic. Eddie might be the best guitar player I ever saw up close.
How loud was it?
Loud. He had his cabinet turned to the wall. He was playing a Soldano 100-watt SL100 100 head, which is what Warren Haynes plays. And I'm sure it was dimed, and it was just filling the room up with guitar. It was perfect the way it was pointed at the wall. It was blistering. Anyway, fast forward, Eddie died, and so Billy Joe was doing shows, mainly acoustic shows at the time. I think there was nobody that could come in and play like Eddie and reproduce that thing. So he kind of, and I'm just guessing here, he just kind of was like, I'm just going to do something different, you know. So that day it was him, another acoustic guitar player for when Billy Joe wasn't playing his, you know, bass player, drummer, harmonica. And a thunderstorm / tornado / whatever happens in Texas happened, and they ran us all into RVs. Get over there in these little things, I guess. And so we did, and he wound up in ours. And I was like, shit, this is great. I've never met him. He was so nice. And I ran out to the van and got my CD and came in and was like, would you sign this? I don't mean to be that guy. He goes, absolutely. So he signs it. And did you ever go to Smith's Old Bar? The load-in, the stairs. He goes, hell of a load-in right there, isn't it? I said, known the world over, Smith's Old Bar. The stairs are harrowing. There's got to be at least 100 of them, and they're really short, and they go straight up. And it's not better in the back. And in fact, when I first moved to Atlanta, the back was a fire escape ladder. So there was they did put stairs back there, but it's like, anyway, it was just this rickety, great club. I've seen so many good shows there, played so many shows there. Probably holds 200 people, maybe. We had a keyboard player named Joey Huffman. It was the first guy we ever had in the band that had a chopped down B3, but still a B3. And he would conveniently have to go somewhere and do some errand every time it was time to load that damn thing in. I left my AC on. I know I did. Oh, the coffee maker's on. Oh, man. But Billy Joe, that was the first thing he said. And then he was like, I think that's a Masonic building. And I didn't know that. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But I had on a Blackfoot t-shirt. Blackfoot Marauder. That somebody had given me, and I thought it was so cool because it was a real vintage Blackfoot t-shirt. And he goes, I want that t-shirt. And I thought, Billy Joe Shaver's a Blackfoot fan? How crazy is that? Well, he wasn't. He's Blackfoot Indian. I read his book later and was like, that's why he wanted my shirt. But he was a sweet man. And that was all. We just spent that hour in there.
Did you give him your shirt?
I did not. No.
Give me that belt buckle.
Yeah. Paul Jackson in our band, he has a denim shirt that belonged to Billy Joe because Scott, whose place we're in now, Billy Joe left that shirt here at the shed, and Scott kept it for years, and he gave it to Paul. So that's pretty cool. Well, I did some sessions with Ken Coomer years ago, and Ken Coomer and Jeff Johnson, speaking of the Scorchers. And I was kind of a wreck, and I had yet to become a professional. But I was enjoying playing some guitar, you know, and we played on these sessions, and Ken said, he said, I'm going to be playing some drums with Billy Joe. I'm going to suggest you come and play guitar. And I was terrified because Eddie was gone, you know, and I thought, I can't do that gig. And luckily he never called because I was like, I think it might be the one gig that I tap out of. I can't play in Shaver, you know, especially not the wreck I was. But, well, we were doing the sessions that we were playing this revved up kind of stuff, you know. And I think at that time there wasn't a whole lot of that going on in Nashville. So maybe, you know, anybody that had a little grit to their guitar tone and played a little fast, you know, was a candidate. But it was like, well, there's way more to it than that with Eddie.